Hi, I'm Jon Atack,
I'm Sam,
and we are going to talk about recruitment or seduction into authoritarian groups and relationships. And we have done this before, and then we've undone it, and then we've redone it, and so we're redoing it again.
Good.
And Sam is going to. This is a really, I spent years studying. Decades. It's 37 years since I wandered out of Scientology. And, throughout that time, I've been studying how groups recruit people, how they get people involved. And it seems to me that that's the most important thing to know. It's good to know how to help somebody recover. It's good to know how a group maintains its hold on somebody. But if you know to look for the recruitment and seduction, then life will be a lot easier for you. You won't be sold things you don't need. You won't find yourself in tempestuous and horrible relationships. You won't find yourself, living in the Philippines in a hut because somebody convinced you that's what Jesus wanted you to do.
I mean, you've said that this applies to a really broad range of groups, from coercive relationships to Scientology to... I mean, you said you looked through the Al-Qaeda recruitment manual.
Yeah.
And found this applied.
Yep. And if you look to the way that, say, a hostage negotiator will get somebody to agree with them, that too uses the basis of this method, and, good on them. If you're doing an intervention where you're trying to help somebody overcome an addiction or a membership of a group that's actually harming their interests, then this also becomes relevant. That in those cases, the simple point is that you find rapport with the person, and if you're selling them a second-hand car or a new religion or a therapy system or a multi-level marketing scheme, that the same psychology applies. So we have a little list. And Samuel is going to read the first point.
Recruitment begins with contact, in person or through advertising.
So there'll be a reach to you. Somebody will walk up to you on the street, and they won't necessarily tell you that they want to change your beliefs, but they will set about doing it. Or you'll get a little flyer, or these days so much recruitment has moved onto the internet. So the idea is you have some little pop-up that will say, do you want to know how to conquer life and become rich?
Look at all these cars that I'm standing in front of. I own them all. You can believe me because, well,
I'm a car salesman. Yeah. Suckers, which is the movie we refer to with regard to cars. So that's very simple. You've got to make contact with somebody, and there are lots of ways of doing that, from walking up to somebody and giving them some incense sticks and then expecting that through the principle of reciprocity, they will give you some money. That's the way that the Krishnas used to recruit on the streets. Or the Moonies would give you some wilted flowers, or sell you some wilted flowers that they picked up from the back of a flower store that was throwing them out.
This says joss sticks, pamphlets, or cheap jewellery as well.
Yeah, joss sticks or incense sticks for the Americans among us. That's why I switched over there, because joss is the Indian term which has entered Britain. So I've done lots of translating.
Good, yeah.
Cheap jewellery is the one used by pickup artists, that they'll offer you a $1 or £1 little bit of Turkish silver, we call it here, cheap silver that's not been assayed for its actual silver content.
That'll probably work on me. So if anybody has any cheap jewellery.
If you have any expensive jewellery that you want to send us, that might work on us, and we'd like that very much. Okay, next point.
Rapport is established by agreement and flattery.
Wow. You're a good looker, aren't you, Sam?
Yes.
And I see that your hair is just like Boris Johnson's. Did you actually sort that out? I mean, he is a very handsome man.
He spends hours getting
it right. You can see him just before he goes on camera. He does that. It's just, what a con man. Not you, Boris Johnson, Bojo. You do it because you can't help it. So you agree with somebody, whatever their points of view are. The ISIS or Al-Qaeda recruiting manual basically says you never disagree with the person. You're told the same thing in Scientology. So you're creating rapport, friendship. Wow, you're my best friend. It's great to see you again.
I mean, the Al Qaeda manual says that if you one of the late points is if you don't feel like you're friends with the person, then you failed to recruit them, and you should give up on that.
Yeah, go to the next person. I had a friend, and he had a little bit of a thing with drink and no money. So at lunchtime, he'd wander out onto the street and he'd approach them and say, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see you. How are you?" And embrace them. "Let's go and have a drink." And it quite often worked.
Nice.
And he would then sell them a little painting at the end of the conversation. He was a dear man. Henry Bunchkowski. He was a wonderful man. But rapport, flattery. If somebody is telling you how wonderful you are doubtless wonderful. And we think so, don't we? We think you're wonderful.
You are wonderful.
But especially because of all the expensive jewellery you've just sent us. But the point is that somebody who you don't know, who's acting like your best friend, isn't your best friend. It seems a simple point to make, but it's worth making. Beware of strangers offering you sweets, in other words.
Yeah, basically. Seducers or recruiters often touch you physically to establish rapport.
Not on the end of the nose, usually.
Why don't you demonstrate?
It's more usually, stuff like this. With a pickup artist, they'll seek to touch a girl's hair. It's a very important thing, and say how lovely their hair is, quite possibly. They also use reversals where they'll make negative comments to
Negging
to get somewhere too. There was a study done of librarians, and do you remember this one? Where in some cases the librarian would touch the person's elbow as they were giving the book back. And then the librarians were rated by the people in the study as to how efficient they were. And the ones who had touched them were rated as more efficient, and that was the only difference. So it creates a liking, which is, again, a very significant point of influence, getting somebody to like you. And you like us, we know that. That's why you flood our channel with money and through
Praise.
the Patreon account and fantastic comments. And
Hundreds of comments.
Thousands, millions of comments. That's why you share everything we do with other people, because we're so likeable. We are down to the next one, which are here.
The recruiter wants you to accept them as a new best friend.
Oh, wow, it's great to see you. Let's have a drink.
As long as you're buying.
As long as you're buying. Wow, have you heard the news about Jesus? The good news about Jesus. Have you heard it? It's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, he has. So you're not going to get anywhere with that. Then?
Group recruiters may test resistance by mentioning the group's name, then dismissing any negative information. In Scientology's one for this was, you can't believe what you...
Well, it would be, I read it in the news.
Yes.
And a bit where you can't believe what you read in the newspapers. Now, it's a curious fact that after the First World War in Britain, nobody trusted the newspapers because they lied so dramatically on behalf of the government. And that is the point where, fake news was first seen to rear its ugly head. I experienced this a number of times where I would be talking to somebody and say, you'd say the word Scientology and you'd see them sort of back off a little bit. And I'd never met anybody who'd actually read the government report on Scientology, which is fantastic, the Foster report. I never met anybody who'd read it. They'd read what the newspaper said about these things. Well, newspapers, you can't trust them, can you? So you get rid of any negativity.
I mean, some groups just call themselves different names when trying to recruit.
Yeah, the Moonies are very famous for having hundreds of different names and being very careful not to tell you that there's anything religious or that Sun Myung Moon believed that he was the Messiah. He was that Jesus had failed and he'd come to sort it all out. Well, he's failed now.
I mean, the family had different names for its various.
Which family?
The family. The American.
Oh, yeah, you see, there's Charles Manson's family.
Not that family.
The International Christian League and various names. And this is all the way into American politics. There are a lot of politicians, Republicans and Democrats alike, who don't realise that when they go to prayer breakfasts and meetings, they're actually being influenced to believe certain things. It's a very invidious thing, and you can go and read about them. We'll doubtless put a link into that. Very, very good stuff. And next one.
Distress may be exploited by probing to find out what is ruining the person's life.
Yeah, Scientology recruiters talk about the ruin, and they're homing in on, what is it that's messing your life up. And it amazed me how willing strangers were to offer up intimate information. And that's a rule I would say. Never offer up private or secret information, anything that might be in the slightest embarrassing, to a stranger, because there's no reason for them to have that information. And once they have it, it may come back and bite you. But you're finding the ruin. So what's messing your life up? Well, there's this girl and she doesn't love me anymore. Or I haven't got enough money in the bank, or you certainly won't have after Scientology's finished with you. That often a relationship problem, often a work problem, that somebody just feels they can't overcome. And that takes us into...
fear of worsening may be played up.
Yeah, you've tried everything, but it will only get worse. And people often respond to that. People often are unhappy because of something they can't do. That recruiting creative people is fairly easy in this way, because they're trying to make a career as a musician, as an artist, as a writer, and these are very difficult things to have a career in. Until the Arctic Monkeys came along and showed that you don't need the industry to push you out there. You can actually conquer the airwaves on your own. But usually you're looking for a middleman, and frankly, that middleman is usually a dodgy human being. When you look at some of the art dealers, Duran Rouault, Ambrose Vollard, that's the Impressionist dealer, and Picasso and Matisse's.
Oh, yeah.
They were criminals,
Yes.
basically. I'm not going to talk about Charles Saatchi here at all.
Good.
There we go.
The group or relationship is offered as a solution to any problem.
Yeah, whatever's wrong with you, the group will solve it. They'll find you a way of communicating to your ex-girlfriend, so she'll come back to you. Okay. They'll find a way of you. In some groups, they will promise medical relief. Scientology is very strict about that, because they got into a little bit of trouble for practicing medicine without a license back in 1951 in New Jersey. But there'll be a promise of fulfillment, satisfaction. That can be, you'll go to heaven and that will be all right. Jesus loves you. Or it can be you'll, overcome the cycle of birth and rebirth, the wheel of suffering, the fear of the eternal return, as Hindus and Buddhists call it. You will be accepted into paradise. Or you have the equivalent in political groups, which is that you will create a paradise for your children or your grandchildren, which is selling, the same sort of idea, and can bring up the same kind of awe, which is the next thing that we're going to mention.
Isn't a common technique used also that you say something like, I had a friend who had the same problem?
Yeah, the deception of the salesman, which is always that your problem has been solved at some time by somebody. And Moonies call this heavenly deception.
Oh, right.
We call it lying.
Right. Techniques are used that lead to a sense of awe, a peak experience. This is strengthened to become further.
Yeah, and in this we'll have all forms of meditation, fixation of perception, repetition, saying something over and over again, dancing, drumming, going round and round the same routine, mimicry, where you follow what another person is doing, or control of attention, where somebody basically directs your attention. This is also guided imagination. This is where somebody else guides what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
And the results can be quite startling. If you, in a culture where people don't meditate, you introduce mindfulness, which is fundamentally what's called zazen, this sitting meditation of Zen Buddhism. which I learned at the age of 18 in a Zen monastery, which was not glamorous. It was just a place up in the north of England. But nonetheless, I learned the technique, and I'm shocked to see the way that it's being used. When I first meditated in Throstle Hole Priory, Spike always puts a picture of Throstle Hole Priory when I mention it. It was the first year that it opened, actually. I was there before the High Court Judge Christmas Humphreys wrote his book about it. Christmas Humphreys, what a great name that is. He was not much of a person, I don't think, but he was a High Court Judge, so can't knock that. He's the man who said 99% of people are criminals when they come to you. You know that the Crown Prosecution Service wouldn't have sent them for trial. Yeah, well, fair trial in front of Christmas. You know, what were his parents thinking of? What should we call him? We could call him Easter, Lent. Michaelmas. Well, let's call him Christmas. The peak experience is very important. When I first meditated, had incredibly profound experiences. You feel, you hallucinate, you feel depersonalized, as if you're outside your body, derealized, where the world around you doesn't fit together properly. It's almost like a drug experience.
I mean, when I practiced the Gansfeld effect, doing that to myself for the first time, I definitely got a sort of buzz from doing it.
You feel a kind of
physical
euphoria and anxiety can diminish. Yeah. And it's just because you're fixing your attention and taking your attention away from your problems. And people get high on it. At the moment, Ruby Wax is on a campaign to sell mindfulness to the world without actually, she even had a piece in New Scientist, and I have written a letter to them because the professor who taught her, Mark Williams, has actually said we don't have enough evidence to support this. Whereas she's saying all the evidence is there. And it's like, what evidence? Having looked for these papers.
And Miguel Farias.
Yeah, Miguel Farias is, who co-wrote the Buddha Pill, in the Buddha Pill says, actually, when we looked at the evidence of thousands of studies, we found only 30 of them were valid studies, and none of them were robust in their proof of anything. But they can make you feel high, and there's this common misapprehension that if you feel great, you've achieved a benefit. And I've said this many times, but cocaine will give you that feeling great, and there won't be any benefit, So,
no. And it can lead to when that high goes away and you start thinking about your problems again. Can make them slightly worse.
Definitely, and I mean I'm aware of many cases where people ended up killing themselves because they were promised some result that they didn't get, and then it was blamed on them that they didn't get it, because that's how authoritarian groups and relationships work. It's your fault. So you use techniques that will rouse a peak experience. They'll make you feel euphoric. They'll make you feel better. Now, it must be said that most of those techniques actually use guided imagination, which is to say hypnosis. They take you into a realm inside your own mind, and because you feel good, you think you've got an answer to your problems. Well, and it's very important, getting high is not a way of resolving life. You want to feel better about life, solve your problems. Get in a good relationship, find somewhere decent to live, have some, an income flow from doing something that is beneficial and good for the world, if you can. Sort out the real life problems rather than, 30 years ago, when I interviewed people who'd done transcendental meditation, and I found that there were people who were just basically neglecting their kids because they wanted to spend 12 hours a day meditating and getting high. And you go, well, you're just meditation junkies. Again, Miguel Farias says that one of his friends pointed out to him that he was becoming a meditation junkie. And he looked and he still supports mindfulness, but he said it was true. I was doing too much of this. And you've got to actually do something in the real world, not just grin on the cover of Psychology magazine as Ruby Wax is doing this month. Sorry, Ruby, you're a brilliant comedian, but not a great psychologist. Sorry.
Harsh words.
Harsh words indeed.
While the person is still high from the peak experience, belief is strengthened by statements of appreciation or written testimonials.
Yeah, you reinforce any belief this way. If you want somebody to stop smoking, get them to talk about the benefits of stopping smoking in front of a group of people. And that will reinforce, makes it shameful to withdraw from the position. You've said you've sort of committed to something. Well, the same is true with these success stories, written testimonials, that when 3 days later you feel rotten again, when the brief euphoria has passed and you are back in the wheelchair because the faith healing didn't actually work, there's a testimonial that says, see, it did. And I had that happen to me when I left Scientology. I had a friend who said, but you wrote all of these great poems about, what you're experiencing. It's like, I was high.
Yeah, you are. Good. Yeah, and again, it's your fault when the high goes away because the high's been given to you by the group, by the method. That's what you've applied it to.
Yeah, and anything bad that happens to you is your fault. Anything good that happens to you is a gift from the group.
Yeah.
Through to the point of these ridiculous law of attraction, the secret, the New Thought movement, as it was called, through Christian Science, Scientology, so many groups. Transcendental meditation does it too. The idea that by meditating or by praying, you can make a change. Well, there was a massive study of prayer done, and sadly it was ineffectual. Though a guy did write to New Scientist and say that it was ineffectual because he'd prayed for it not to work. So you have to take in confounding factors.
The recruit is drawn into what seems to be a friendly group where everyone is supportive and flattering. Seducers will be extremely friendly and considerate until they have you hooked.
And you did mention the technique of negging, which I think we ought to take up as well, because it's not on the list there. And that is where, say, a pickup artist, they're usually men, but this can happen in a gay context. It can also happen with women seducing men. That if there are, say, 4 young women and you're interested in one of them, you ignore the one you're interested in. You pay all of your attention to the other 3. You neg that person, so they will become interested in you. So that's a little psychological trick as well. There's what's called the honeymoon period. It happens when you find yourself in a relationship with a predator. That they'll be really, apparently, very considerate towards you and do all sorts of things for you up until the point where they've got you. And when you're hooked, then you'll start hearing the shouting. You'll start being gaslit, so that it's like, no, I didn't do that. What are you talking about? You left the hairdryer over there. Whatever. That they'll be questioning your mental stability as part, and they'll be angry and mean and horrible, and that's going to lead us into the human predator. And I would say that understanding just these very simple techniques, that when people pretend friendship, it's time to be cautious, and caution is a good thing, and take your time, and after a few encounters with somebody who's seeking to befriend you, you may actually find that they really are your friend, and that's great. But we advocate skepticism, don't we, Sam?
Yes.
Yes, we do. So this has been about recruitment and seduction, which are the same thing. And I am Jon Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And we thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
If you have any expensive jewellery that you want to send us, that might work on us, and we'd like that very much.